My name is Gwen Olson, and I am the author of Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher, God's Call to Loving Arms. I spent 15 years in the pharmaceutical industry working as a detail rep, primarily as a specialist rep calling on psychiatry, cardiology, neurology, endocrinology, and OBGYN. And after 15 years in the industry, I felt like I had a moral obligation to come out and tell people what I had experienced, what I had seen, and what I had participated in the industry, because there were a number of things that I had identified and recognized as being dangerous to the American people at large. And one of those things was the consistent minimization of side effects that drug reps were taught to do. We were starting to be encouraged to minimize more and more and to skillfully sidestep the concerns and objections of physicians. And I knew that that created a dangerous environment for the patient. And I saw firsthand several circumstances where my minimization of side effects or misinforming a physician had actually resulted in the patient being damaged and or killed. Initially, during my tenure in the pharmaceutical industry, I sold psychiatric drugs in the mental institutions, the MHMR clinics, psychiatric emergency rooms of hospitals. And while I was selling psychiatric drugs, I really got an education about the fact that many of the manifestations that I had seen in terms of behavioral things, such as pill rolling and the shuffling gait and the jaw and lip smacking that you often would see patients in mental institutions exhibiting, that these were not manifestations of their psychiatric illnesses. These were actually manifestations of their psychiatric drugs. And then I started to realize that there was something called the revolving door syndrome. This is what I was educated on by McNeil Pharmaceutical, actually, when I sold Haldol, that there's something known as the revolving door syndrome. And what that means is that patients who are hospitalized continue to come back repeatedly. And every time they come back, they have lost more function than the previous time that they were admitted. So I started to put one and one together and started to look at the side effects that people were exhibiting from these drugs and realized that these were actually brain-damaging therapeutics, and that we weren't talking about this aspect of the drug with the doctor. We weren't talking about this aspect of these drugs with the general population. Who was discussing these things were the doctors in the mortality and morbidity conferences. When I was supposed to be the fly on the wall, standing there with the food that I was delivering for the doctors, I was also listening to the cases that they were talking about. And I started to realize that these were seriously brain-damaging therapeutics. The doctors would comment about it. The doctors were also, and their staffs were also often very concerned about patients who exhibited reactions to these drugs because they could in fact become violent and pose a threat to both the other patients and the staff. And so, knowing that these things weren't being disclosed to people in the general public, I started to wonder what the motivation was behind keeping this information from people. Why would they not let people know the full disclosure about the drugs? Because I knew that if someone was actually crazy and they got relief from a drug, it only made common sense that they would want to take the drug and that they would feel normal again and they would be stabilized. And in fact, it was proven by the various experiences that I had that the reason that people didn't want to take their drugs was because they were in fact not getting relief. They were getting more severe symptoms and having more exacerbation of mental illness when they were on the drugs than they were when they were off the drugs.